Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. Deep in the serene mountains of Colorado, Andrew Miller built his dream, a self-sustaining sanctuary far from the chaos of urban life. But when an iron-fisted HOA president, Rhonda Crane, set her sights on controlling his land, Andrew's peaceful retreat turned into a battlefield. A fight for freedom, justice, and resilience was about to begin. Andrew Miller had always dreamed of a life far removed from the bustling noise and constant constraints of urban living. A decade ago, this dream became a reality when he stumbled upon a sprawling 20-acre parcel of land nestled in the picturesque mountains of Colorado. The plot was a sanctuary of natural beauty, blanketed by dense pine forest, rolling meadows, and a crystal-clear stream running through its heart. It was the perfect canvas for the eco-friendly, self-sustaining home Andrew envisioned. As an experienced civil engineer, Andrew had the skills and determination to design a house that harmonized with the environment. Over the years, he built a compact yet elegant home that ran entirely on solar power, with a rainwater harvesting system and an advanced composting waste solution. Every corner of the property bore his personal touch, from the solar panels glinting in the sunlight to the vegetable garden brimming with organic produce. This was more than a house. It was a testament to his independence and dedication to sustainable living. The isolation of the property had always been one of its greatest appeals. It provided Andrew with an escape from the increasingly uniform suburbs encroaching upon the surrounding countryside. For years, he reveled in the tranquility, tending to his home, hiking the forest trails, and enjoying the natural world unspoiled by the trappings of modern development. That peace was first disrupted when Mountain Ridge Estates, a high-end residential complex, broke ground less than a mile away. Andrew was initially indifferent to the construction, reasoning that his secluded plot was shielded by both distance and dense woods. However, he couldn't ignore the gradual encroachment. Trees began to fall as bulldozers carved roads through the wilderness, and the once quiet area buzzed with the sounds of construction. Andrew's apprehension turned to frustration when, a few months later, he received an official-looking letter in the mail. It was from the Mountain Ridge Estates Homeowners Association, HOA, claiming that his property fell under their jurisdiction. The letter demanded that Andrew pay an annual fee of $600 and cited several violations, including unauthorized solar installations and unapproved wastewater management systems. At first, he laughed at the absurdity of the claims. His land predated the development by decades, and he had meticulously maintained its independence. Still, Andrew decided to clarify the situation and contacted the HOA directly. That was his first encounter with Rhonda Crane, the president of the HOA. Rhonda was a woman with an ironclad belief in the absolute authority of the association. She dismissed Andrew's protests and insisted that his property's visibility from the newest lots meant it was subject to HOA standards. She gave him 30 days to comply with the regulations or face fines. Andrew realized this was no simple administrative error. It was the start of a battle for his property, independence, and peace of mind. Andrew thought the HOA's demands were laughable at first, but Rhonda Crane's persistence quickly transformed the situation into something far more menacing. True to her word, within days of their first conversation, Andrew found a bright orange notice taped to his front door. The paper detailed the alleged violations of HOA standards, including his improper waste management system and unapproved solar panels. What startled him most wasn't the content of the notice, but the realization that someone had trespassed onto his property to deliver it. It didn't end there. Andrew's newly installed security cameras captured even more alarming footage over the following days. Men in uniforms bearing the HOA logo walked around his property, measuring distances, photographing his house, and scribbling notes as if conducting an official inspection. Their presence wasn't just an annoyance, it was a blatant invasion of privacy. Furious, Andrew called the local sheriff, reporting the trespassers. Deputy Stevens responded promptly, advising Andrew to post no trespassing signs and consider legal action if the intrusions continued. Despite these measures, the HOA intensified its efforts. Andrew's mailbox overflowed with threatening letters, each one demanding compliance and warning of escalating penalties. The notices included fines for failing to address violations, which ballooned to hundreds of dollars in mere weeks. Rhonda even began spreading rumors throughout Mountain Ridge Estates, claiming Andrew's property was an environmental hazard. She told residents that his systems were unsafe and could pollute the water supply, painting him as a reckless neighbor jeopardizing their pristine community. Determined to protect his rights, Andrew decided to respond directly. He contacted Rhonda again, presenting copies of his property deed and permits proving his independence. However, Rhonda dismissed his evidence outright. "This area is part of our long-term development plan," she said with a smug smile. "Your property affects our community, so you'll need to comply, or else." Andrew's frustration boiled over when he returned home one evening to find a group of HOA hired workers dismantling part of his fencing. They claimed they were surveying property lines, but Andrew knew better. This wasn't a survey. It was an intimidation tactic. When he confronted them, one of the workers simply shrugged and said, "Take it up with the HOA." Rhonda's actions weren't just invasive, they were relentless. At one point, she even began holding neighborhood meetings where Andrew's property became the main topic of discussion. She urged Mountain Ridge residents to sign a petition demanding that Andrew's land be forcibly annexed into the HOA's jurisdiction. Flyers appeared on mailboxes throughout the neighborhood, accusing Andrew of bringing down property values and ignoring the community's needs. The pressure was mounting, but Andrew was not the type to back down. He installed more cameras to document every interaction, took detailed notes of the trespassing incidents, and saved every letter and notice he received. As the fines piled up and the threats escalated, Andrew realized this wasn't a battle he could fight alone. He reached out to Linda Harper, a seasoned attorney specializing in property rights and HOA disputes. After reviewing the evidence, Linda's face darkened. "This isn't just overreach," she said firmly. "This is outright harassment." Together, they prepared to push back against Rhonda and her army of enforcers. What had started as an annoying misunderstanding had become a full-blown war over Andrew's right to live peacefully on his own land. Andrew and Linda wasted no time preparing their case. Armed with property deeds, permits, and video evidence of trespassing, they filed a cease and desist letter against the HOA. Linda's letter outlined the numerous legal violations committed by the association, including trespassing, harassment, and fraudulent claims. It also warned that any further attempts to impose fines or intimidate Andrew would result in legal action. Rhonda Crane, however, was not easily deterred. Instead of backing down, she escalated her campaign. The HOA responded with a lawsuit, claiming Andrew's property was a nuisance that harmed the aesthetic value of Mountain Ridge Estates and diminished property values for neighboring homes. The lawsuit demanded that Andrew comply with HOA regulations, pay backdated fees, and remove the solar panels and composting system. Linda was unfazed. "They've handed us exactly what we needed," she told Andrew, her tone resolute. "They think this will scare you, but it's going to backfire spectacularly in court." The hearing was set for a crisp October morning. On the day of the trial, Andrew walked into the courtroom with Linda by his side, carrying a file stuffed with evidence. Across the aisle sat Rhonda, dressed in a power suit, exuding smug confidence. She was flanked by two lawyers and carried a thick binder of HOA bylaws. The proceedings began with the HOA's attorney presenting their case. He argued that Andrew's property, visible from several new lots in the development, disrupted the community's cohesion. He claimed the unaesthetic solar panels and unconventional waste system posed safety and environmental risks, citing HOA guidelines as the basis for their demands. Linda's rebuttal was swift and devastating. She presented a detailed timeline showing that Andrew's property predated the development by decades, making it exempt from HOA jurisdiction. She displayed satellite images, video footage of trespassing incidents, and a notarized survey proving Andrew's land was well outside the HOA's boundaries. When Rhonda took the stand, Linda pressed her hard. "Mrs. Crane, can you explain why your employees were on my client's property without his consent?" she asked, holding up screenshots from the security cameras. Rhonda's excuses fell flat as Linda exposed the association's deliberate overreach. The turning point came when Linda revealed internal HOA emails obtained through discovery. These emails sent by Rhonda to board members contained damning evidence. In one, she referred to Andrew as a problem that needs to be dealt with. In another, she instructed staff to fabricate violations to strengthen the HOA's case. The judge, visibly unimpressed by the HOA's arguments, interrupted their attorney during closing remarks. Are you seriously suggesting that an HOA has jurisdiction over any property visible from its lots? By that logic, you'd have authority over properties miles away, or even public land. That's absurd. When the ruling finally came, it was a resounding victory for Andrew. The judge declared that the HOA had no legal authority over his property. He ordered the association to pay $50,000 in damages and legal fees, issue a formal apology, and remove all liens and fines against Andrew. The court also imposed a restraining order prohibiting HOA staff and board members from approaching within 100 feet of his property. As the verdict was read, Andrew allowed himself a small smile. Across the courtroom, Rhonda's face was a mask of fury and humiliation. But Andrew knew the battle wasn't truly over. Rhonda wasn't the type to admit defeat easily, and he was right. Despite the crushing defeat in court, Rhonda Crane wasn't ready to surrender. For someone so used to wielding unchecked power within the HOA, the judgment felt like a personal humiliation. Instead of backing down, she became more determined than ever to make Andrew's life unbearable. What began as a legal conflict quickly devolved into a campaign of revenge. The first sign of trouble came just a week after the court's decision. Andrew returned home to find deep tire tracks cutting through his vegetable garden. Security footage revealed that a truck had driven onto his property late at night, tearing up the soil and destroying weeks of work. Andrew reported the incident to the sheriff, but without license plates or clear evidence of who was responsible, there was little they could do. Then, anonymous complaints began flooding the county inspector's office. Claims of unsafe construction, illegal modifications, and environmental violations were all lodged against Andrew's property. Although inspectors were required to investigate, they consistently found nothing amiss. One inspector, clearly frustrated, admitted to Andrew, "It's obvious someone is trying to harass you. Unfortunately, we're obligated to respond to every report." The most brazen act came when a portion of the forest bordering Andrew's property caught fire. The flames were quickly contained by local firefighters, but Andrew's security cameras captured figures in hooded jackets, dousing the trees with gasoline before setting them alight. The video left no doubt. This was arson. Andrew handed the footage over to the sheriff's department, who launched a formal investigation. Rhonda's involvement in these acts wasn't overt, but Andrew had no illusions about who was orchestrating the chaos. She operated through intermediaries, using her influence to manipulate HOA members into participating. Flyers were distributed across the Mountain Ridge Estates neighborhood, painting Andrew as a dangerous recluse and falsely claiming he had plans to sue individual residents next. The community was whipped into a frenzy, with some residents even forming watch groups to monitor his property. Despite all this, Andrew refused to be intimidated. He strengthened his security measures, installing additional cameras and floodlights. He worked closely with Linda, documenting every incident meticulously. When the sheriff's department confirmed that the arson was connected to individuals linked to the HOA, Linda filed a second lawsuit. This time, the stakes were even higher. Meanwhile, Rhonda became increasingly erratic. She held impromptu HOA meetings where she ranted about Andrew being a blight on their community. Witnesses later reported that she encouraged residents to do whatever it takes to pressure him into compliance. Her paranoia grew as the legal noose tightened, but instead of backing down, she doubled her efforts. The turning point came when one of Rhonda's closest allies on the HOA board secretly recorded a meeting. In the recording, Rhonda openly admitted to organizing the arson attempt, bragging about how it would teach him a lesson. The recording also revealed her attempts to falsify further violations and her strategy to harass Andrew until he gave up and moved away. This damning evidence, combined with mounting complaints and the ongoing police investigation, finally sealed Rhonda's fate. A warrant was issued for her arrest, and law enforcement raided her home, uncovering documents that tied her to nearly every act of harassment against Andrew. As Rhonda was led away in handcuffs, Andrew watched from his property, feeling a mix of relief and vindication. Yet he knew that her reign of terror had left scars, not just on his land, but also on the community that had been manipulated into supporting her vendetta. Rhonda Crane's downfall was as dramatic as her reign of terror. The damning recording from the secret HOA board meeting was the final nail in her coffin. Combined with the police's findings, including surveillance footage of the arson and other evidence linking her to the harassment, a strong case was built against her. The morning of her arrest was unusually quiet in Mountain Ridge Estates. As the sun rose over the manicured lawns, a convoy of sheriff's department vehicles rolled into the neighborhood. Residents peeked from their windows as officers approached Rhonda's grand two-story home. It was the kind of house she had always prided herself on, a showcase of success, power, and control. Rhonda answered the door with her usual air of authority, but the moment she saw the officers and their warrant, her bravado faltered. "This is a mistake," she barked, clutching her phone as though she could call her way out of trouble. But the sheriff wasn't swayed. Calmly, he read the charges aloud: criminal trespass, arson, falsification of evidence, harassment, and conspiracy. As they placed her in handcuffs, Rhonda's neighbors gathered in small groups, whispering among themselves. For years, she had ruled over them with an iron fist, using HOA bylaws as a weapon to enforce her will. Now they watched as the person they had once feared was escorted into the back of a police car. Some felt vindicated, others uneasy. Many had supported her schemes, either out of loyalty or intimidation. Meanwhile, Andrew received a call from Linda Harper, his attorney. "They've got her," Linda said. "The charges are airtight, and with the evidence we've provided, there's no way she's walking away from this." The trial that followed was swift and decisive. Prosecutors presented a mountain of evidence, including the recording where Rhonda admitted to organizing the arson and directing the harassment campaign. Witnesses testified about her increasingly erratic behavior, and several HOA members, eager to distance themselves from the scandal, cooperated with the investigation. Andrew took the stand to recount his experiences in painstaking detail. He described the relentless harassment, the vandalism of his property, the false complaints, and the emotional toll of living under constant threat. His testimony painted a vivid picture of Rhonda's abuse of power, leaving little doubt about her culpability. When the verdict was announced, it was a moment of profound relief for Andrew and a reckoning for Rhonda. The jury found her guilty on all charges. The judge, citing the malicious intent behind her actions and the extensive damage she had caused, sentenced her to 8 years in prison. In addition, she was ordered to pay Andrew $75,000 in restitution for the property damage, legal fees, and emotional distress. As the sentence was read, Rhonda sat stone-faced, her earlier bravado replaced by a simmering resentment. But there was no escaping the consequences of her actions. The gavel fell, and her reign of terror was officially over. In the weeks following her conviction, the community began to rebuild. A special election was held to replace Rhonda, and the new HOA president, Tom Harris, took immediate steps to repair the association's reputation. He issued a public apology to Andrew and announced sweeping reforms, including greater transparency and limits on the board's power. For Andrew, the resolution brought a sense of closure. He used the restitution funds to repair the damage to his property and invested in additional security measures. Though he was relieved that justice had been served, the experience left a lasting mark. He knew that standing up to Rhonda had been necessary, not just for himself, but for the principle that no one should be bullied into submission. As for Rhonda, her departure was met with a mix of relief and reflection. Her once loyal supporters began to question their complicity in her schemes, and many sought to make amends with Andrew. The very community she had sought to dominate was now turning toward unity and reform, a stark contrast to the fractured environment she had fostered. Andrew's property, once a source of conflict, became a symbol of resilience and independence. Though the scars of the battle remained, he looked forward to a future of peace, knowing that he had stood his ground and won. In the wake of Rhonda Crane's arrest and subsequent conviction, the atmosphere in Mountain Ridge Estates shifted dramatically. For years, her reign had been marked by fear and compliance. Now, the community was free to move forward without the weight of her oppressive influence. It was as though a storm had passed, leaving room for healing and renewal. The HOA, under its new president, Tom Harris, began a thorough process of reform. Tom was everything Rhonda wasn't: approachable, pragmatic, and genuinely interested in the well-being of the residents. His first move was to publicly apologize to Andrew Miller. In a letter shared with the entire community, he acknowledged the HOA's overreach and praised Andrew's resilience. What happened to Mr. Miller was unacceptable. The letter read, "This HOA must stand for fairness and cooperation, not domination and fear." Andrew appreciated the gesture but remained cautious. After years of harassment, he wasn't quick to trust the organization that had caused him so much distress. However, he couldn't deny that the changes were real. The HOA revised its bylaws to prevent future abuse, limiting the board's authority and requiring unanimous votes for significant decisions. Transparency became a cornerstone of the new regime, with open meetings and detailed records accessible to all members. Meanwhile, Andrew's property took on a new role in the community. Once vilified as a blight by Rhonda, it became a source of fascination and inspiration. Andrew's eco-friendly systems, from the solar panels to the rainwater harvesting setup, drew attention from neighbors eager to explore sustainable living. At Tom's suggestion, Andrew agreed to host an open house, showcasing how his self-sufficient home operated. The event was a resounding success. Families from Mountain Ridge Estates and beyond flocked to Andrew's land, marveling at the ingenuity of his designs. He explained how his composting system worked, demonstrated the efficiency of his solar array, and shared tips for reducing environmental impact. For many, it was an eye-opening experience that challenged their perceptions of what modern living could look like. The open house sparked a ripple effect throughout the community. Within months, several residents installed their own solar panels, inspired by Andrew's example. A few even approached him for advice on starting vegetable gardens or upgrading their homes with sustainable features. What had once been a point of contention now became a bridge for building connections. The HOA itself embraced the shift in priorities. Under Tom's leadership, the board approved a community garden project, converting an unused plot of land into a shared space for growing fruits and vegetables. Andrew was invited to consult on the design, and his input proved invaluable. The garden soon became a vibrant hub of activity, bringing neighbors together and fostering a sense of camaraderie that had been missing for years. Andrew's personal life also began to stabilize. The restitution funds from Rhonda's case allowed him to repair the damage to his property and invest in additional improvements. He built a greenhouse to extend his growing season and expanded his solar array to power new equipment. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace, knowing that his land was secure and his independence protected. Perhaps the most surprising development came from the neighbors who had once supported Rhonda's crusade. Many approached Andrew to apologize for their complicity, admitting they had been swayed by her fear-mongering. While some apologies felt perfunctory, others were heartfelt, and Andrew accepted them graciously. He recognized that Rhonda's manipulation had bred division, and he was determined to move forward without holding grudges. The transformation of Mountain Ridge Estates did not go unnoticed. Local media picked up the story, framing it as a tale of triumph over injustice. Andrew became something of a local hero, celebrated not just for standing his ground, but for inspiring positive change. Reporters interviewed him about his sustainable lifestyle, and his calm, measured responses reinforced the image of a man driven by principle rather than revenge. For Andrew, the journey had been arduous, but the outcome was worth it. His victory extended far beyond the courtroom. It reshaped an entire community. Where fear and control had once ruled, collaboration and understanding now thrived. And while Andrew had no intention of joining the HOA, he felt a newfound connection to his neighbors, a sense that they had all, in some way, emerged stronger from the ordeal. On quiet mornings, Andrew often sat on his porch, sipping coffee and gazing out over his land. The scars of the past remained, but they were reminders of battles fought and won. His property wasn't just a home, it was a testament to resilience, independence, and the power of standing up for what's right. As the dust settled, Andrew Miller found himself reflecting on the journey he had endured. What began as an attempt to protect his home from unwarranted interference had grown into something far greater. His victory was not just a personal triumph, but a catalyst for change in a community that had been shackled by fear and control. The reforms within the HOA marked a turning point for Mountain Ridge Estates. Transparency, fairness, and mutual respect replaced the iron-fisted rule of Rhonda Crane. Neighbors who had once been divided now worked together, finding strength in their shared commitment to creating a more inclusive and supportive environment. For Andrew, the changes were deeply satisfying. His once maligned property was now a symbol of resilience and innovation, inspiring others to embrace sustainable living. Where once there had been tension and isolation, there was now connection and understanding. Though he remained fiercely independent, Andrew appreciated the camaraderie of his neighbors and the newfound respect they showed him. The scars from the battle were still visible, both on the land and in the memories of those who had endured it, but they served as a testament to the power of standing firm against injustice. Andrew's land, nestled in the quiet beauty of the Colorado mountains, was no longer just a retreat from the world. It was a symbol of what could be achieved through courage, determination, and an unwavering belief in doing what was right. With the sun setting over the forested hills, Andrew stood on his porch, watching the golden light bathe his land. A soft breeze rustled the trees, carrying with it the promise of peace. He smiled, knowing that his fight was over, and he had won, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been inspired to live boldly and freely.